They had 3 yards of passing, Minnesota did, and somehow they scored 23 points, which was easily enough to beat Detroit. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL Top 10's for Friday. My name's Ernie Jennings. Glad to have you here, either watching or listening. I'm getting this out a little late, but had to do some running around this morning, so I didn't get a chance to work on this at that time. So I know it's late, but it is going to cover the weekend, so maybe you'll get a chance to listen to it sometime today, tomorrow, and before Sunday's games. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about the 3 games on Thursday, on Christmas Day, and hope everybody had a good Christmas. Shout out to my cousin Dan in Washington State. Hope he had a good Christmas as well. But we're going to cover today the 3 games on Thursday. Going to do that last because I also want to do my top 10 power rankings, kind of having to pretend that the games on Thursday aren't included in this analysis, and then some season stats as well that don't include the games from Thursday. So I'll do those 2 things first, come back to the game so we kind of get an idea of what happened, how the season's looking prior to this 16th game for every team. So let's get started with that. So as I was saying, we'll start with my top 10 power rankings. Now, this has been difficult. It's the same top 10 teams. The only other team that I've even considered putting into the top 10 is the Philadelphia Eagles. But honestly, the way they win, and they have 5 losses, which is the same amount of losses as the Houston Texans, who I did have in this list, even though that's the team I would be questioning whether it should be Houston or whether it should be the Eagles. But I put Houston in there. I feel like, and we'll talk about it. We'll start with them. We'll start from the bottom, work our way up. So yeah, I have Houston at number 10, not the Eagles, because the Eagles just look sporadic. They have won some games lately, and they did win their division, but I just, not comfortable with the way their offense or defense really is ultimately. Not that either one's terrible, but we'll have a good idea about both these teams, the Houston Texans and the Philadelphia Eagles, because Houston Texans play the Chargers at LA. That's a big game right there because the LA Chargers are on my list as well of my top 10. And then the Eagles are playing the Buffalo Bills, which are my number 9 team. I put the Buffalo Bills at number 9. And I did that because last week they played Cleveland. And they just hang on to win that game. I really need to see Buffalo beat some more quality teams. Now, when I'm looking at this list of top 10s, I do have the New England Patriots kind of high. But what I did was I went through this list of all these top 10 teams, and I looked at the teams they've beaten that have a winning record. So for the Buffalo Bills, which is why I'm kind of keeping them down a little bit, they've beaten 3 teams with a winning record. So they're 11-4, and 3 of those wins are against teams with winning records. The Houston Texans, for example, had 4 wins against quality teams. The 2 that have the most wins against top 10 teams are the Rams, who I did actually drop down a couple spots. They've beaten 6 teams that have a winning record, and the Jacksonville Jaguars have beaten 6 teams with a winning record. Those are the 2 that have beaten the most teams with winning records. So, but like I said, both the Bills and the Texans play teams with good records. I mean, like I said, Houston's playing the Chargers. The Chargers are 11-4, and then the Bills are playing the Eagles, who are 10-5. So this is really going to this will definitely show us the quality of all 4 of those teams. I mean, if the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Bills, I'll definitely put them into the top 10 and drop Buffalo out. On the other hand, if Buffalo beats the Eagles, depending on what some teams do above them, I could move them up. Not just because somebody loses, but also I'm saying that, but as I'm looking at this list, it's kind of interesting. But I could move them up. Number 8, I'll tell you what I'm talking about here. The Chicago Bears, I have it number 8. I dropped them 2 spots despite the fact that they won. They beat Green Bay in a game they had no business winning. But it's been kind of their way they win. The end of the game, they have the winning score, and you're like, how did that happen? And in the game against Green Bay, all Green Bay had to do was catch an onside kick, and the game's over, and Green Bay wins. That didn't happen. 12% chance that the Bears were going to get that onside kick, and they got it, and they ended up tying. Not only did they get it, they had to score a touchdown. They got that too, and then they ended up winning in overtime. How crazy is that? But I just don't like the Bears. They have 3 wins against teams with winning records. And that includes the Green Bay game, which honestly, that was a lucky win there. So I don't have a lot of confidence in them. I dropped them down a couple of spots because I wanted some other teams to move up that I thought were actually better. Now, at number 7, Denver Broncos. I dropped them the most, 5 spots after losing handily to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I dropped them for that loss also because they've only played 3 teams with winning records, with a winning record right now. Not even looking at the game they did last night, which they did win against Kansas City. I'm not even counting that. And it wouldn't matter because Kansas City has a losing record as well. So it doesn't improve their number of wins against teams with winning records. So I dropped Denver down after that loss. They lost by a couple of touchdowns in that game at home. Now, like I said, they did play Kansas City. They won that game. But that was very close. And Kansas City's got their 3rd string quarterback in there, and it was a tough game for Denver. Number 6, Los Angeles Chargers. I moved them up 2 spots. That's one of the teams that I moved up ahead of Chicago. I just felt like the Chargers have been pretty good. The Chargers have beaten 3 teams with winning records. And not that Kansas City has a winning record, but they are, at the time, were thought to be one of the better teams. They beat Kansas City twice this year. First game of the season, in fact. So I got them at number 6. They play Houston. Big game there. This will be another matchup where we'll see how good is Houston. Their defense is excellent. Their offense is not so hot. On the other hand, the Chargers' offense is pretty good except for the offensive line, and their defense is also good. So we'll see what comes out of this. This is in LA. Houston has to go to LA. Houston really needs this win to keep their hopes alive to win the division. So they need to get it. We'll see what happens. All right, number 5. I've got the San Francisco 49ers. I moved them up 2 spots. They're 11-4. And again, this is another game where the winner of the game, they're playing Chicago Bears. Chicago's going to San Francisco in this game. So the winner of this game will really prove a little bit better the quality of their team. And we'll see how big the victory is and so forth. San Francisco has beaten 4 teams with a winning record this season. So I got them number 5. Number 4, Jacksonville Jaguars continue to win, have the longest winning streak now in the NFL. Well, no, they don't. Houston does, actually. They're 1 game behind Houston. But Jacksonville is now 11-4. They just got done beating the Denver Broncos, who I had at number 2 on my list, who had only lost twice, and that was fairly early. Denver was on an 11-game winning streak, and the Jacksonville Jaguars went in there and beat them by 2 touchdowns. So I have them at number 4, up only 1 spot, only moved them up 1. Basically, it was just moving them up because Denver went down, is really all that happened. They play the Indianapolis Colts, who have Phillip Rivers. Colts, and it's in Indianapolis. The Colts absolutely have to win. Hope the Jaguars lose next week as well. Actually, they're hoping more for Houston. They need Houston to lose both their games to have a chance to make the playoffs as a wild card. That's their only hope at this point in time. So we'll see what happens with them. So it could be a tough game. The Colts have played people fairly well. They played 49ers fairly well the first half, and then it kind of fell away. They played Seattle really well. Very close game there. Had a chance to actually beat Seattle, just couldn't do it in the end. So they've played pretty tough with Phillip Rivers as their quarterback. Not a lot of offense necessarily, but trying to control the ball. Their defense is pretty good. Now, number 3, Los Angeles Rams. I dropped them 2 spots because of their loss to Seattle. That was a big game last week, and but I did drop them 2 spots. Only 2 spots because they did lose to Seattle, one of the best teams now, along with the Patriots, who and the Broncos all have a record of 12-3. And I only dropped them 2 spots also because, like I said, the Rams have beaten 6 teams with a winning record, which is tied for the most this season. So I kept them up there, didn't drop them a long ways down this list. Now they have a game relatively easy compared to some of these other teams. They do go to Atlanta and play. Atlanta has a decent defense, but I expect the Rams to come out of that with a victory. Though I will say they also went to Carolina, the Rams did, and end up losing that game, which was a very costly game for them. Now, as you look at it, the Carolina loss combined with the Seattle loss really have dropped them from leading their division to a wild card team. Number 2, New England Patriots. I moved them up a couple of spots. The Patriots beat the Baltimore Ravens. I got the Patriots up here this high because they're 12-3. Only one of 3 teams with a record like that. I'm a little torn about having them that high, to be honest with you. They beat the Ravens, which is a decent win, but Ravens don't have a winning record. They would have had a winning record if they could have won that game. They didn't. And the Patriots only have 2 wins against teams with a winning record, one of those being the Buffalo Bills. And they actually did beat Denver early in the year. They were one of the first losses that Denver had. So, and like I said, only 3 losses. When you're making this list, I thought, if I dropped them, how far do I drop them? Like I could move them behind the Rams, who are at number 3, and just move the Patriots. And because the Rams lost to the Seahawks, who are number 1, the Rams could be number 2. So that's a possibility. But I'll leave it there, and and we'll see how the wins go. I expect the Patriots to beat the Jets, but if it's close at all, I think the Rams handle Atlanta handily, and say even the Jaguars, any of these teams that are in the top 5 or 6, if they win handily, I might drop the Patriots if they don't look that sharp, even in a win. But we'll see. Now, number 1, Seattle Seahawks. I put them into number 1 because they beat the Los Angeles Rams, who were number 1. Also put them up there because they have 5 wins against teams in the top who do have a winning record. Let me get that out properly. Now, they have an easy game as well. They're going to Carolina. And I really shouldn't say it's an easy game because it's a very important game for Carolina, who are leading their division. And they really, if they get this win, they have a chance to wrap up the division depending on what Tampa Bay does. So it's a big game for Carolina. It is in Carolina, and the Carolina Panthers have already beat the Rams, like I mentioned. So we'll see what happens there. A lot of really exciting games this Sunday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, plus the games we just had on Thursday. All right, let's look at some of our season leaders now. And we'll start with, I didn't do all of them. I did some because I wanted to get these certain ones in there. In passing yards, Matthew Stafford leads the NFL. Now, this is, like I said before, Thursday night. So we'll see what Stafford does in his game this, actually Monday, I believe. But right now, Matthew Stafford is leading the NFL in passing yards after week 16 with 4,179, only 4 more yards than Dak Prescott. He had such a huge game last week when he threw for over 400 yards. That put him up there to number 1. So Stafford's number 1 in passing yards. And I'm going to compare this with Drake May, who's number 4 right now in passing yards. There's really a gap between number 1 and number 2, and then number 3 and 4, and then a drop between 4 and 5. I mean, Dak Prescott has 4,175 yards. Jared Goff is third with 4,036, which is a good, 139 yards behind him. And Jared Goff did not have a good game this Thursday, so we'll see what happens with him. But Drake May is fourth with only 3,947, which is a good 32 yards behind Matthew Stafford. So I mentioned that because I also want to say now when we look at, and a third person I'll put on here real quick, Josh Allen made it. He's number 10. He's got 3,406 yards, which is a good, 73 behind Matthew Stafford. All right, so now when we're looking at passing touchdowns, Matthew Stafford leads in that category as well with 40. Jared Goff is second with 32. That's a difference of 8 touchdown passes. That's a big gap. And then third is Dak Prescott with 28, even another 4. So Matthew Stafford has a huge lead over everybody. Drake May and Josh Allen both have 25. Like I said, Matthew Stafford has 40. So just to give you some context about people who are being mentioned as MVP candidates, I think it's Matthew Stafford. I think team has a really good record and 2 more games to really prove this out one way or the other between, say, those 3 players and who might end up coming out on top. But right now, I do think Matthew Stafford has a lot of the key stats here, as well as just leading a team to a winning record. Let's look at rushing yards. Now, here's a stat that Jonathan Taylor had a hold of the entire season almost. But ever since Daniel Jones has went out and the team has been on this losing streak, the Colts that is, Jonathan Taylor's numbers and lead over James Cook has continued to dwindle. Not only continues, but has finally met its match. Jonathan Taylor is now number 2 in rushing this season with 1,489, and James Cook now is number 1 in rushing yards with 1,532. He's the only player in the NFL right now that's averaging over 100 yards per game. Now, Jonathan Taylor is averaging 99, so it's pretty close, but those 2 players have a huge gap over Devon Achane, who's third with 1,267. So, I mean, Achane's over 220 yards behind Jonathan Taylor. So it's a big gap between number 2 and number 3. Jonathan Taylor, I don't know if he's going to be able to catch James Cook because Taylor plays the Jaguars again, who lead the NFL in fewest yards allowed to running back. So not that he doesn't break one off and has a big game, but it could be tough for him to have a big game, whereas James Cook might still just need even a decent game to hold on to his lead. Something else I wanted to mention about this list is, if you were in fantasy, somebody like Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey went early in the draft. And McCaffrey's been okay. He's been consistent, a lot of touchdowns, and yards when you combine rushing and receiving yards. So he's been pretty decent, but he made the top 10 in rushing this time around. He hadn't been on this list, but now in week 16, Christian McCaffrey is number 10. He's got 1,039 yards. Now, somebody else who's was an early pick was Saquon Barkley. He had not been on this list, but he all of a sudden showed up this week. He has had a couple of decent games lately. Saquon Barkley's number 9 in rushing yards with 1,072. Now, that's just a little over half of what he did all last year. And then number 4 now, who's been moving steadily up this list, but number 4 is Derrick Henry with over 1,253. He has 1,253 yards. He's only 14 yards behind Ashane. I don't see him catching Cook or Taylor, but it's impressive. Early on, these guys were not producing, especially Barkley and Henry. But lately, now the season's starting to get toward the end. All of a sudden, they're picking up their pace a little bit and looking a little sharper. So we'll see how Barkley does in these next couple of games and then into the playoffs. He may be peaking, as we might say, at the right time. Unfortunately for Derrick Henry, the Ravens need almost a miracle to even make the playoffs. Now, let's move on to rushing touchdowns. Now, here is a category where Jonathan Taylor does lead over everybody by a fair amount. Jonathan Taylor for the Colts now has 17 rushing touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs and Josh Jacobs both have 13. And then you have 3 players, 2 of which last year were leading the NFL, Derrick Henry and James Cook, along with Josh Allen now, all have 12. So they're 5 back of Jonathan Taylor. Now, Christian McCaffrey's also on this rushing touchdown list with 9 himself. He's number 9. So he's showing up here late in the season on these charts. Now, let's look at receptions. Here's another category where we've had a little change of who's number 1. Puka Nacua for the Rams, despite missing a game now, had another dozen receptions, has 114 receptions to lead the NFL. Jamar Chase has 110. Jamar Chase for the Bengals has 110. And then Trey McBride, who last week was leading, now has 109 to drop down into third. He only had 4 receptions, while Chase had 9 and Nacua had 12. Nacua had a monster game, just a monster game last week. And then Jackson Smith-Njigba went over 100 receptions himself. He's got 104, which is good enough to set the record for the Seattle Seahawks now in receptions in a single season. And then here's Christian McCaffrey again at number 6. He's got 92. He's trying to get to 100 receptions. He's also trying to get 1,000 yards rushing, which he's done, and 1,000 yards receiving. That's the problem there, if he's going to be able to make that 1,000 yards receiving. We'll look at that in a second. But looking at receptions first, receptions by running backs. Christian McCaffrey has 92 receptions. Jahmyr Gibbs has 72. Bijan Robinson has 71. Those are your top 3 players. And no one's going to catch McCaffrey in receptions with those 92. I mean, it's 20 receptions difference. But when we're looking at receiving yards by running backs, Christian McCaffrey's had a huge lead all year. But all of a sudden, Bijan Robinson has been coming on strong with the Falcons. He had another big game. He had another 92 yards, I believe it is, to gain a lot of ground on Christian McCaffrey. Now, Christian McCaffrey has 849 yards receiving as a running back. Bijan Robinson has 776. So now this lead that was over at one time well over 200 yards is now down to 73 yards. So he's cut the gap with 2 games to go. We'll just see what happens. But I would like to see Christian McCaffrey, or even Bijan Robinson, but Christian McCaffrey get to 1,000 yards receiving. He needs another 151, which at the pace he's going with only 2 games to go, he's not going to make it. He's going to have a big game, 2 big games fairly, pretty much. I mean, with the need to get basically 75 yards a game, that's more than he's really averaging, quite a bit more, honestly. He's averaging closer to 50. So he's going to have some big games to make it to 1,000 yards receiving and rushing. Those 2 players, McCaffrey and Robinson, have a huge lead over number 3, Jahmyr Gibbs, who has 557. So the difference between Robinson and Gibbs is like 219 yards. There's a big gap. 4th. And we had a couple of new players, rookies here. Ashton Genty made the top 10 in receiving yards by running backs. He's number 9. R.J. Harvey for the Broncos is number 10. So a couple of rookies on this list. That's kind of fun to see. All right, those are some of the numbers I wanted to look at. Some of the season stats going into it, because they're big stats and they have a lot of implications on who's going to be the rushing leader for the year, NFL in scrimmage yards, and can McCaffrey make it to breaking all those categories that he's got going on there, and who is going to be the MVP, comparing some of the numbers with Stafford, Drake May, and Josh Allen. Josh Allen won the MVP last year. And if it says anything, that kind of, he has to have a spectacular year in a way to win it again, because Lamar Jackson had won it 2 years ago. And even though numbers wise, he had a better year, I thought anyway, numbers wise, we'll put it that way, than Josh Allen. Josh Allen won it. And there seems to be a hesitancy by the people who vote to give the same person the award 2 years in a row. So it's very possible that Josh Allen's going to have to do something spectacular in the next 2 years to overtake May and Stafford. I don't see anybody else, any other non-quarterback player really being in this vote as far as number one goes. All right, let's look at the games that we had on Thursday. The first game, Dallas Cowboys went to Washington and beat the Commanders 30-23. This game was fairly fun to watch. The game was close. Honestly, the Commanders had to make a comeback, and they actually tried anyway. Halftime, Dallas Cowboys were winning 24-10, but Commanders put up 10 points in the third quarter to tighten the gap a little bit, but just could not get the final touchdown that they needed to overtake the Cowboys. Now, in this game, really, Dallas, actually defensively, one of their better games, because they only gave up 328 yards, which for most teams would be quite a bit, but for them isn't actually that bad. But they, on their other hand, they had 480 yards of offense, 211 yards rushing. That's huge for them. Good game there. And then both teams, wow, penalties galore. Dallas had 11. Washington had 10. That's just too many. One of the key problems for Washington in third down conversion rate, 1 for 6. Only was able to convert third down one time out of 6 tries. That's 16%. Whereas Dallas had 8 for 20. 20 times they were trying to convert third downs. That's a massive amount of times. They did 8 times. They did converted for 40% rate. The fact that Washington only lost by 1 touchdown when the Cowboys had the ball for almost 39 minutes to 21 for the Commanders. That's how lopsided that was. Now, looking at some of the numbers, Dak Prescott had a pretty decent game. 19 completions on 37 attempts for 307 yards, over 8 yards an attempt, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. The one bad area was 6 times he was sacked in this game. He had a quarterback rating of 97.5. Now, Josh Johnson, see, this is why the game was even close at all. Josh Johnson's the third-string quarterback for the Commanders. He came in, did okay, actually. 15 completions on 23 attempts, 198 yards, which is 8.6 yards an attempt. Often when you see somebody like this, they're dumping the ball all the time. But he did pretty well. No touchdowns, no interceptions. That's good. Only sacked 1 time, had a quarterback rating of 92.3. Not bad for a first time starting like that as a backup quarterback. He's been in the league a long time, but got to start for the Commanders. In the running game, Javonte Williams got hurt early in the game. He did have 13 carries for 54 yards and a touchdown before he went out of the game. And which not bad, 4.15 yards a carry. So pretty good there. But Malik Davis came in and did well as well. He had 20 carries for 103 yards. That's over 5 yards a carry. No touchdowns, though. Hang on. Sorry about that. And then for Commanders, this is what kind of shows why the stats are a little bit lopsided as far as time of possession. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt had 11 carries for 105 yards. That's 9.5 yards a carry, had 2 touchdowns. Now, one of the touchdowns was a 72-yard run. So they had just gotten the ball back to try to get back in this game, and they did it that fast. 72 yards in one play, and all of a sudden their defense is back on the field, with a good outcome prior to their coming back on the field. But that's one of the reasons. So in that particular series of downs, the Commanders had the ball for a minute, and then they're handing it right back. But they needed that touchdown, and they got it that quickly, which really helped them to kind of hang around in this game. In the receiving department, not much here. Nobody was jumping out. George Pickens did all right. 4 receptions, 78 yards. They tried to get the ball to CeeDee Lamb. The Cowboys did. He had 5 catches, but only 46 yards. He was targeted 10 times, which was the most times by more than any other receiver with 10 targets. Now, the touchdowns went to Jake Ferguson. Only had 1 catch for 6 yards, but it was a touchdown. And the same with Kevontae Turpin. Here's another big one. This was a killer for the Commanders. Turpin catches a little screen pass, goes 86 yards for the touchdown. That was it. The only catch he had and was 86 yards, a touchdown. If you're only going to have 1 catch, that's a great way to do it. All right, and then for the Commanders, Terry McLaurin, 5 catches for 63 yards to lead the team in targets and catches, but only 5. They only had 15 total receptions in this game. Nobody else had more than 3. So not a lot going on there. All right, now looking at some of the numbers for the Dallas Cowboys, Prescott, he needed only 9 yards passing to move up on the season numbers here. Well, he got 307, which really boosted him. Dak Prescott now was in 8th place going into this game, now with 4,482 yards. He jumps all the way up into 5th spot now with that amount of yardage, and really not very far behind number 4. Catch that this next game. He has a chance of catching, probably, maybe even breaking the record Tony Romo set in 2017 with over 4,900 yards. He'd have to have a huge game, but we'll see what happens. But now he's in 5th spot with 4,482 yards in passing yards in a single season for the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott also needed a couple of touchdowns. He was tied for 10th all time in passing touchdowns in a single season with 28. He got 2 more, which puts him into a tie for 7th with 30 passing touchdowns for the Dallas Cowboys in a single season. So pretty good game for him there. And his stats have been pretty impressive this year. Especially what's interesting is really that Pickens still, I really thought Lamb would kind of take over, but Pickens has still been more or less the guy for the most part. Lamb has not been able to be as effective as I kind of thought he would. Now, speaking of George Pickens, he had 78 yards in this game with the Commanders, which gives him now 1,420 yards on the season, which is now good enough to move him all the way up to 4th. He was in 8th. He's now in 4th with that total yardage. So he's 4th all time for the Dallas Cowboys in receiving yards with 1,420. He's had a really good season. Has a chance to maybe move up a little bit more before the end of the year. One more stat for the Dallas Cowboys, and that's in total scoring. Brandon Aubrey had 12 points in this game to move from 8th spot up into 6th. He now has 457 points he's scored for the Dallas Cowboys, which is good enough to put him into 6th spot all time in total scoring for the Dallas Cowboys. He actually missed a kick. It was 50-something yards, and which, everybody comments how great his kicking is, and it almost seems like he's not allowed to ever miss a kick, but it was 50-something yards. Even in today's kicking world, it's still not a chip shot from 50 yards. Now for the Detroit Lions, moving into our next game, we'll look at that. Look at the Detroit Lions. By the way, the Commanders had nobody who had a top 10 season-wise, career-wise. Really hasn't been their year this time, so wasn't really anything to talk about as far as they go. All right, now, looking at the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings, I tell you, Detroit Lions just have botched this whole year. They're 8-8 now. So are the Minnesota Vikings, both 8-8. Detroit Lions every week need to win the game. They need a win, and they could not get it. In fact, they just look terrible on offense. Lost 23-10. I mean, halftime it was 7-7, and then after that, I mean, they just could not get going, and we'll talk about why here. I mean, the Detroit Lions had 231 yards of offense. I mean, they held Minnesota to 161 yards of offense. 158 of those were rushing. They had 3 yards of passing, Minnesota did, and somehow they scored 23 points, which was easily enough to beat Detroit, and we'll see why here in a second. But Detroit, they had 231 yards of offense, like I said, net yards. That's after sacks. But this is a team that's one of the highest scoring teams in the NFL. It scored 10 points. Usually one of the teams that racks up the most yards. What's kind of disturbing about it to me is when you look at the Pro Bowl picks, they have at least 5 players going to the Pro Bowl. But with a record like that, Detroit had the ball for 32.5 minutes, 27.5 minutes for Minnesota. Here's the issue. In the passing department, well, first let's look at the fumbles. Detroit fumbled the ball 4 times. There's 4 turnovers right there. Jared Goff, 18 completions on 29 attempts, 197 yards, just under 7 yards an attempt, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. So there's 6 turnovers. Detroit Lions turned the ball over 6 times. That's why they lost. That's for a team that was broaching a record. I think they said the Bills last year and another team from earlier, the Patriots in the past, had the fewest turnovers in a single season. And Detroit was right there with them going into this game. Well, with 6 turnovers, that's over with. No longer are they in that company. But 6 turnovers. Jared Goff was also sacked 5 times in this game. He had a quarterback rating of 64.9. You know, for a team that needed to win this game, and not against a good team, they're not playing one of the better teams in the NFL. They could not put a game plan together at all. Max Brosmer, backup quarterback, came in, 9 completions on 16 attempts for 51 yards, just over 3 yards an attempt. He was sacked 7 times for 48 yards. That's where you get only 3 net yards passing because of 48 yards sacked, 51 yards passing. You only got 3 yards of passing. And they couldn't win, and Lions could not win the game. How sad is this? Max Brosmer had a quarterback rating of 62.2. In the running game, you know, I really was hoping that the Lions could come out and make up for last week when they only had 15 yards rushing. Well, they didn't really do it at all. 17 carries for Jahmyr Gibbs. They did try to run the ball. They ran it 30 times. Gibbs had 17 carries for 41 yards, though. Only 2.4 yards a carry. David Montgomery had 10 carries for 25 yards. That's only 2.5 yards a carry. Just dismal. Total of 30 rushes for 68 yards, just over 2.27 yards a carry. Just over 2 yards a carry. Just not what you needed. And Minnesota Vikings had 28 carries as a team for 158 yards. That's 5.64 yards a carry. That's skewed quite a bit because Aaron Jones had 18 carries for 53 yards. That's under 3 yards a carry. He did have a touchdown. And I say it's skewed because Jordan Addison had 1 carry for 65 yards, which led to a touchdown, 65-yard touchdown run for Jordan Addison. That's what skewed this number so much, 65 yards on one carry. Now in the receiving department, for Detroit, Amon-Ra St. Brown had a fair game, 8 catches, 68 yards, though not really a lot of yards, only 8.5 yards a catch. Isaac Tesla, 3 catches for 49 yards, and 1 was a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs, 2 catches, 23 yards. That'll hurt him as he's trying to gain ground on McCaffrey. And then David Montgomery, 2 catches for 15 yards. So 4 catches by out of the backfield for 38 yards. Just okay. 18 catches for 197 yards and a touchdown. Minnesota, Justin Jefferson led the team with 4 catches for 30 yards. That was the most catches. Aaron Jones had 3 catches for 10 yards. Nobody else had more than 1. Actually, that was just 2 people had 1 catch. They only had 9 total, which is kind of crazy because Amon-Ra St. Brown had 8 by himself. All right, enough of that misery for the Lions. I was really rooting, actually, in some ways for the Lions because some friends I have, they're big Lions fans, so I like to root for the Lions. But, man, they just, I don't know. I really honestly thought of them as going into the season as a Super Bowl contender. Last year I thought they were, but their defense had been so beaten up that it really cost them, I think. So I thought this year, hey, they'll be ready to go, but just not happening. All right, in this game, Jared Goff only needed 1 passing touchdown. He got it, and he now has 33, which puts him into 3rd place all-time for most passing touchdowns in a single season with 33. Kind of hate to say that after how bad he played, though. But, yeah, he's 3rd most touchdowns in a single season. Amon-Ra St. Brown was tied for 10th all-time in receptions in a single season with 98. He got 8 more. Now is up to 106 receptions. So went over the 100 mark, which 106 is good enough to put him into a tie for 6th all-time in receptions in a single season with 106. And then one more positive number here. Aiden Hutchinson, one of the best defenders, had 2 more tackles for loss, now has 43, which puts him into a tie for 7th in his career for the Detroit Lions for most tackles for loss in a season with 43. Good enough for 7th. All right, now for Minnesota, they didn't have anybody that was a top 10 candidate this time around. All right, one more game to look at. That's the Denver Broncos and the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, going into the year, this was going to be probably would have been thought of as a huge game, but Kansas City was just playing a lot of backups, just didn't have the offensive power. Kept it close, though. Halftime, they were leading actually 7-6. And even after the 3rd quarter, the Broncos had come back. They were winning 13-10, but it was really close. But the Broncos are able to pull away and win 20-13 in Denver. I'm sorry, not in Denver. That was in Kansas City. Denver was at home last week when they played the Jaguars. All right, let's look at some of the numbers in this game. It's kind of, the numbers aren't too thrilling on Kansas City's side. Denver racked up with 303 yards of net yards in offense to 139 for Kansas City. Here's another team. You know, when you got a backup quarterback, this is what you have. Net yards passing for Kansas City, 57. 175 for Denver, so not a lot there either. Really not good at all. Now, Denver only had 5 penalties for 57 yards, which is good. Last week, they did pretty decent as well. They have been one of the more penalized teams. Kansas City only had 2 penalties for 10 yards, but one of them was the key. They had stopped Denver short, which probably would have forced, I think, a field goal, which would have kept the game within a touchdown, lead. 4th down You know they're just trying to draw Kansas City offsides, and they did it. Unbelievable. A guy jumped offsides, first down for Denver, and the game's over. It was terrible. So they only had 2 penalties, but one of them was just so huge. A 5-yard penalty that was just you wonder, what is the guy thinking? You don't have to move. You just sit there and wait for the clock to run out. They were not going to move. They had no motivation to really try to go for the first down. It was 4th down and, like a yard or so. Wow. Nix in this game, 26 completions on 38 attempts, which is really a good percentage, but the yardage, only 182 yards, less than 5 yards an attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, only sacked once, had a quarterback rating of 76.9. Now for Kansas City, this backup quarterback did okay, just okay. He ran around a lot. Chris Oladokun, 13 completions, 22 attempts, 66 yards passing. That's it. Only 3 yards an attempt there. 1 touchdown, no interceptions, only sacked 1 time. Actually had a better quarterback rating than Bo Nix. He had a quarterback rating of 79. In the running department, nobody really stood out here. R.J. Harvey, 14 carries for 43 yards. That's just over 3 yards a carry. Bo Nix, 9 carries for 42 yards. That's 4.67 per carry, and he did have the touchdown. And then Jaleel McLaughlin, 7 carries for 40 yards for 5.7 yards a carry. So kind of split up between those 3 players. They averaged exactly 4 yards a carry in this game. Now for Kansas City, they tried to run the ball. Well, they ran it 19 times. Let me look at this number here. Yeah, Denver had the ball in this game for 39 and a half minutes. Kansas City, 20 and a half. So almost twice as long as Kansas City. Denver had this ball, and they won only by a touchdown. Wow. It's because of the interception was one of the key reasons there. It was the interception kept Kansas City in this game. But Kareem Hunt in this game had 7 carries for 38 yards, 5.4 yards a carry. Isaiah Pacheco had 2 more carries, 9 of them for 32 yards, 3.5 yards a carry. So really nothing spectacular there. And then the quarterback, Chris Oladokun, had 2 carries for 11 yards. Receiving, R.J. Harvey again, 5 catches for 33 yards. He's kind of coming on lately in his receptions and a touchdown. Led the team with 5 catches. 3 guys, Evan Ingram, Troy Franklin, and Cortland Sutton, all had 4 catches apiece. And then finally for Kansas City, Travis Kelce, kind of quiet, but then in the end when they were trying to come back down the field, had 5 catches total for 36 yards on 6 targets, which was the most catches by Kansas City Chief in this game. Like I said, only 13 receptions in the game. Travis Kelce had 5 of those. Rashard Smith had 3 catches, only 5 yards. But the 5 yards was on 1 catch, and it was for a touchdown. So good for him there. All right, let's look at some of the numbers in this game. Bo Nix needed 1 passing touchdown in his career to move up another spot, and he got it. He's actually now in a tie for 6th all-time with Jay Cutler with 54 passing touchdowns in his career for the Denver Broncos. Now for the Kansas City Chiefs, Chris Jones had a pretty good game. And I think he was the guy that jumped offside though. But he had a good game otherwise, but wrong time to jump. Chris Jones in tackles for loss had 1 more tackle for loss. He was in a tie with Justin Houston with 96, but with that next one, he's got 97, which puts him into 3rd place all time in tackles for loss for the Kansas City Chiefs. Only got 2 players left, and next year, if he plays, he should be able to catch them. Derek Johnson has 103. Tamba Hall has 105, so he's not that far behind, only 8 behind 1st place. And then also Chris Jones in sacks had another sack, which puts him now into a tie for 3rd all-time in sacks for the Kansas City Chiefs with 85.5. He tied Neil Smith, who played way back in the 80s and 90s. So he's now tied for third all time in the Kansas City Chiefs in sacks. All right, that is a look at this game with Denver and Kansas City, with Denver winning at 20-13. A lot of big games coming up tomorrow, in fact. So check out your listings for when those games play and what channels and so forth. You always got to do that anymore. I mean, Thursday, the first two games were on Netflix. Fortunately, I have NFL Plus, so I was able to watch them through that service. But if you don't have Netflix, you were out of luck unless you could find another way to watch them, which I know a lot of people have. But I don't know where all these games are being played. In fact, on Thursday, if you only had regular TV, you were out of luck because two games were on Netflix. The other one was on Prime. Interesting. A lot of money for the NFL, though, to do it this way. All right. I appreciate you listening. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. You'll find it on Just the Stats NFL on YouTube, where you'll find all the charts and so forth. I apologize for yesterday. I swear I do not know what happens. Gremlins running around on my computer. But the way I normally use my phone as my camera, because it's a much better camera than the camera on my laptop, that connection would not work for whatever reason. It just was a mess. But then I plugged it in today to do it. Fine. Everything's fine. So somehow 24 hours later, it works fine. I don't know why. Please, again, as I say, like and subscribe. I hope you had a good Christmas. Looking forward to these games coming up. Man, we're getting close to the playoffs. So some big games as far as positioning in the playoffs go, I think, more or less than only a few of them are teams in and out of the playoffs. It's more of where you're going to be in the playoffs as an NFL team. All right. So for this episode of NFL Top 10s for Friday, I'm out. I'll talk to you on Monday.